Good afternoon. Welcome to Western North Carolina's Reporting at 10. I'm Dr. John Robert Smith Jr. III. Tonight, investigative journalist Michael David Miller II is presenting a local news story in Cullowhee, North Carolina. He's talking about buffers. Michael, are you there?
Hey John, good to see you tonight. I'm at WCU, and that's right, I'm here investigating buffers. I've sure learned a lot, especially when doing Professor Jennings' optional bookwork here.
That's fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been studying?
Sure thing. A lot of chemistry students are stunned. What is a buffer? Luckily, you don't have to do the work. A buffer is a solution that resists changes in pH when limited amounts of an acid or base are added to it.
Wow. So, essentially, buffers neutralize an added acid or base.
You've got it. A buffer solution also has a limited capacity, which basically is the amount of acid or base a buffer can neutralize. A buffer can't neutralize substances forever because that would defy certain scientific laws.
Got it. So would I be correct to assume that a buffer always brings back a substance to a pH of 7, neutral?
Not exactly. Buffers can be established at a variety of pHs, which basically means that you could have a buffer that keeps a pH of a substance around 3, which is very acidic. You could even have one that's around 10, which is basic. Though it's a common mistake that chemistry students often make because it seems as if something that neutralizes a substance, it would just bring it back to a neutral pH of 7. But that's not true.
Okay, so we know what a buffer can do, but what is a buffer even composed of?
Great question, John. A buffer solution can be composed of a weak acid and the salt of a conjugate base, or it can be a weak base with the salt of a conjugate acid.
Why is this, Michael?
Well, when it comes down to it, buffers work by taking either the conjugate base, conjugate acid, weak acid, or weak base, and neutralizing the substance. For example, when an additional base is added, a weak acid or conjugate acid can neutralize it. On the other hand, if an additional acid is added, the conjugate base or weak base can neutralize it. It's really useful stuff, you know.
So a buffer can't just be two random combinations of molecules?
Exactly, that's what makes buffers so unique.
You spoke about the pH of a buffer solution. How exactly do you determine that?
Another really good question, and this is one that can really get students sometimes. Basically, to find the pH, you use the equation pH equals pKa plus log acid over base. If you remember, pKa is a number that shows how weak or strong an acid is. A strong acid will have a lower pKa, while a weaker one has a bigger pKa. This equation is used a lot, so if you're in chemistry, make sure to remember it.
Good to know. And I've just gotten word that adding a small amount of a strong acid to a buffer decreases the pH of a buffer. Is that true?
That's true. When you add a small amount of acid, you're either allowing the conjugate base in an acidic buffer solution to form a weak acid, or the weak base in a basic buffer solution to form a conjugate acid. This will lower the pH, but not as much as it normally would. Though, if you remember, can't do that forever because all buffers have a limit. On the other hand, when you add a strong base, you increase the pH, which makes sense, as either the weak acid component in an acidic buffer solution or the conjugate acid component in a basic buffer solution combines with that OH to form the weak base and also water.
Okay, so for example, if you had a buffer which contained equal amounts of a weak acid and its conjugate base at a pH of 4, what would happen if you added a small amount of acid to it?
Good question. And viewers, I encourage you to pause your live feed to figure this out. Okay, if you added a small amount of acid to this buffer, then the pH would decrease, but not as much as it normally would, remember, because the buffer is resisting this change when it reacts with this acid and conjugate base.
Well, that sums it up for me. Buffers are important. Michael, do you have any other last words for us?
So with that knowledge, have a good night, John.
Good night, Michael.